Cherrie, to get started today, we'll start with the Fast Five. And the first question is, what's your name?
My name is Cherrie Nolden.
What's your farm's name?
Our farm is Wonder Acres Farm.
And where are you located?
We are in Dodgeville, Wisconsin, which is southwest Wisconsin, halfway between Dubuque and Madison.
And the interesting thing about being in Wisconsin, I don't think we're going to talk about any dairy animals today.
No.
And what livestock species do you graze?
We currently have small draft horses, a fairly large flock of sheep, and a fairly large herd of goats, and we use livestock guardian dogs to protect them, and like a 15-head laying flock of hens.
Oh, very good. And what year did you start grazing animals?
Well, I started poorly in 1991, so 34 years ago, and started doing better in 2001. Started doing more rotational grazing and putting animals on the landscape rather than maintaining them in lots and feeding them, and only using the grass in the 2 months that it would grow when it got so beat up with the confinement type approach.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So just a couple of years.
Yeah. Most of my life, and learning all along the way.
Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, the podcast dedicated to sharing the stories of grass-based livestock producers and exploring regenerative practices that improve the land, animals, and our lives. I'm your host, Gal Hardage, and each week we'll dive into the journeys, challenges, and successes of producers like you, learning from their experiences and inspiring each other to grow and graze better. Whether you're a seasoned grazer or just getting started, this is the place for you. Calling all ranchers, if you're looking to optimize your grazing operation and boost your bottom line, Noble Research Institute can help. The Noble approach to education pairs their own in-field research with the expertise of ranch managers and advisors to find practical solutions to your unique challenges. Now's the time to register for one of their June in-person courses. Noble will be in Jefferson City for Noble Grazing Essentials, June 4th through 6th. In Kansas City for Noble Profitability Essentials, June 11th through 12th. And in Fredericksburg, Texas for Business of Grazing, June 24th through 26th. Noble Research Institute ensures that every insight they share has been tested in real-world conditions, giving you solutions that work, not just theories. Visit noble.org today to learn more about these courses or to register. For 10 seconds about the farm, I have some disturbing news, or it's a little bit disturbing to me. Last week on the podcast, talked about I purchased some pigs from Jared, which we appreciate. My livestock guardian dogs have killed some of my pigs. Now, when I say that, I think there's only one culprit, one dog in particular that's doing it. I thought I'd introduced my dogs to them. I thought it was going to be okay, and it wasn't. I go in a little bit more depth on it later in the episode when I talk to Cherrie about it. So what's your advice? I will post the question in the Grazing Grass community. Let me know what you've done when similar situations have happened, or how do you solve this? Moving on to the podcast, 10 seconds about the podcast. The new website will be live this week. Grazing Grass Resources. I'm planning to announce it next week on the podcast, so you didn't hear this part. But I do plan on later this week pushing out to the Grazing Grass community, hey, the resources are alive. Yeah, they're live. Go over there and submit resources, because this is only as good as the community makes it. It's a blank slate for us to build a resource directory that benefits all of us. So those in the Grazing Grass community, I'll push out something later this week when it's ready. I'm really close. The website will be out pretty soon too. So enough of all that. Let's talk to Cherrie. Cherrie, growing up, did you think you would be there grazing animals?
No, I figured I would be a veterinarian or a college professor or some employee working for some business. I didn't expect to be a full-time farmer and using adaptive grazing as the primary income source for me.
I think that's so interesting. When I think about when I was going to school, I had this dream to dairy, but I never thought I could dairy straight out of college just because of money. And then, when you dairy, you can debate whether you should go to college or not. One set of grandparents was like college, the other set was like, go get some milk cows. But so I was going to college with the thought, well, become a vet or do animal biotechnology so I can teach at a land-grant university and do research. Of course, you know how life happens. My journey didn't even follow that at all, but very interesting overlap in that. So when you went to college, what did you do? What did you major in?
Initially, I was on the track as an undergrad to head into veterinary pre-vet classes, and I shifted to genetics partway through there. And then as I was getting further into that, I realized that the human end of veterinary medicine was not suited for me. And so I shifted away from that and moved into wildlife ecology because I've always really enjoyed being outside, nature space. In 4-H, I was involved in basically any of the projects that were outside related.
Oh, yes.
And so I got a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology and did some postgraduate research on predators of grassland birds and chronic wasting disease transmission to scavengers. And that's connected to the dairy side of things because we were interested in if these scavenging mammals are eating on infected deer carcasses, are they then spreading CWD to the dairy mow hay, the forages that are fed to dairy cows? And is that a potential for BSE getting into this part of the world? So then I moved to Kansas and worked in farm policy and conservation programs in Kansas, and then moved back to Wisconsin and got a master's degree in agroecology and nearly finished a PhD in animal and dairy sciences. The agroecology project was using goats for brush control and oak savanna restoration. I used my own goats for that work. And then my research for my doctorate work was a new immune-based treatment for grazing livestock parasites. So using egg-based antibodies to control gastrointestinal parasites of cattle and goats. And then I went to farming full-time, and that's what I'm doing now.
Did you finish your doctoral program?
I didn't. I got through the dissertation stage and decided that I probably should not be going in that direction.
I didn't make it quite to the dissertation. I made it partway through my doctoral program, but I was more in education and technology and the overlap and how that affects student academic growth. But then I decided that wasn't what I really needed to do, even though I spent all that money.
Right. And time. I mean, it's a lot of time.
Yeah, because I was looking at the time it was going to take to complete this and whether or not it was really going to be beneficial financially, for one. Is that really what I wanted to do? And so I'm partway through my doctoral program, not finished.
Yeah, same here.
So you mentioned there some of the research you did were with your own animals. So where in your journey did you start getting your own animals?
When I was a kid, we had a hobby farm in Stoughton, Wisconsin. It was a small 5-acre farm, and 4-H animals was basically what we had there. And I didn't have goats or cattle or sheep back then. It was all cats, chickens, animals for projects. And then we had a few horses in the backyard, basically. So it was overstocked and poorly managed. And then I moved basically next door and added 10 acres to that 5 acres and started rotationally grazing there with broilers and selling chickens to a French restaurant in Madison, and really was doing a lot of intensive rotational grazing of poultry for that, mostly grass-fed chickens or range-raised chickens. That's when I got the livestock guard dogs too, because I lost that contract because aerial predators, I was able to control the ground predators with fencing, but the hawks during the day and the owls at night were killing all my chickens. So
Oh, yes.
I couldn't supply the restaurant because I kept having so much death loss, and the migratory bird treaty and everything. You can't shoot those predators. So we needed guardian dogs to keep them away. And that was the solution there. But I was also rotationally grazing the horses at that time and pasture breeding them, keeping them in a herd. And that was long before I heard anything about why we can't rotationally graze horses.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was doing it just because it was something I'd heard about and it seemed like the thing that should be done. And it was improving the health of the animals and the land and not producing erosion and all the other problems. So I was doing that. And then I took the horses with me to Kansas and did rotational grazing on a mixed grass prairie, dry area, just 45 minutes north of the Oklahoma border in south central Kansas. So got to experience very different soil types and climate and forage communities and managing the animals there. We also had a watershed dam on the place, so we would have from a tiny little pond up to 40, 50 acres of water when we'd get a 4-inch rain down there. So that was interesting managing around that fluctuation.
Were you grazing on red dirt?
Yeah, it was, we were north of the Gyp Hills, just on the very edge of the top edge of the Gyp Hills. So we had a little bit of that red dirt, but it wasn't, the majority of the farm was loam, a nice loam.
It's crazy to me. I'm in northeast Oklahoma, so we have nice loam here. You start heading west, and it's amazing. Before you know it, you're looking around, and it's red everywhere.
Yes.
That clay, it's just amazing, that change and how drastic it happens.
Yeah. And it was so invaded with cedars down there too.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I went to school at Oklahoma State, so driving out to Stillwater, and that's kind of, the red dirt really takes over in that area, music-wise and for the soil. And just the places here, if you see land that's not being taken care of, a few things happen. It's honey locust taking it over, or if it's close to some homes, it may have Bradford parasites decided to take it over. But those are usually the invasive species. You see a little bit of cedar, but not a lot. You go 2 hours west of me, Stillwater, land there, not managed, is just covered in cedar, and it just takes over like nothing else.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's when I got the goats when I was out there.
Oh, yes.
Because I was like, well, I'm working in conservation and all these invasive species that I worked on with prairie restoration up in Wisconsin aren't that dissimilar to the invasive species in Kansas. And goats are just a natural solution to that. They love to eat that kind of stuff. So I added the goats to the herd at that time. I'd had sheep back in Wisconsin and then sold them and moved to Kansas. Was sheepless for a few years, but then got sheep again shortly after we got the goats, and just been using them for weed management and brush management in the rotational grazing system as a multi-species system. And then when I moved back to Wisconsin from Kansas, I moved to a farm that was on sand, 200 feet deep of sand.
Oh, yes.
And that was a challenge for droughtiness and during the middle of the summer and maintaining forages and nutrient cycling and that sort of thing. And then now I'm on a farm in Dodgeville that has loam and clay, and it's a really nice, productive farm, although we only have 22 acres of what I would consider good pasture of the 130 acres that we own. And the rest of it is woods or degraded woodland that we're using the other species, the goats and the sheep, for brush management and kind of converting that into an oak savanna. And we just rotate the horses on the good pasture, the 22 acres of good pasture.
Yeah. So with you mentioned that's just a small portion of your overall land base. And we want to talk more about horses, but before we get to your horses, let's talk about what you're doing with your sheep and goats on that oak savanna target land.
Sure. Yeah. So I've done something kind of unconventional. My prior education and experience with managing goats and sheep was rotational grazing, like is typical and typically recommended. And that was what we used too for my master's research, was testing the intensity of the rotation for the ability to reduce the shrub layer in an oak savanna restoration. And then I moved to this farm and we did a forestry thinning on a degraded woodland that had an understory of multiflora rose and prickly ash and honeysuckle, buckthorn, brambles of all types. And all those species just exploded when we did the forestry thinning. And that area was an oak savanna in the past. There are some open grown oaks choked out in the middle of the forest grown trees. So we thinned it to a 10 to 20% canopy. And then we didn't grind the stumps or dig the stumps out. We didn't grind the tops, all that slashed. We just left in sight. We put a perimeter fence up of woven wire with a high tensile top, and of 30 acres of the 80 that we bought specifically for this project, and then turned the goats in there, and we did set stock with the goats. So for the last 5 years, we set stocked between 150 and 200 goats per year in that 30 acres and just let them eat the brush. And now the brush is mostly gone. And because goats don't like to eat forbs and grasses that are close to the ground, they basically overgrazed the invasive species and encouraged the grass and the forbs to grow. And so then we've been increasing the sheep numbers as the goats have converted that brushy cover to a forb and grass dominated cover. And now we have enough clearance that we are putting cross fences in, and we can rotationally graze the sheep with some goats still in there to control the ever-present and ever-trying to grow invasive woodies.
Oh, yes. With your goats and grazing them, they have access to a large amount of browse. So I'm assuming parasite issues weren't a major concern.
They actually were, and that's part of
were
why.
they?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have a huge population of basically all the different species of parasites up here in the sheep and goats that we have, and I actually used those for my doctoral research. I collected manure from our goats to infect the goats in the lab and in my research, the copriculture, and we identified all the different species of parasites that were out there. And the manure was so loaded with parasites, it was easy to produce the copriculture amount that was necessary for orally inoculating our goats to test the antibody treatment. So anyway, we have lots of parasites, and my approach to dealing with that was genetic selection rather than throwing inputs at it or trying to manage to prevent them from getting exposed. And so I learned during my doctorate with doing the parasite research that parasites actually have kind of a symbiotic relationship with the host, and a low level of parasite infection helps improve the immune function of the host. And they don't have autoimmune or allergy issues when they have a little bit of a parasite level that is moderating that immune response. So at low levels, they can be useful. At high levels, they can be economically damaging, and we're trying to avoid that. But I've found that the easiest way to avoid that is select the genetics that don't need to be dewormed. So we don't deworm our goats and sheep anymore. They don't need it. And anything that would need it, it gets culled. And so now we're at a point where we bring in new stock to test them and as potential breeding stock for our animals. And we put them out on our pastures, and most of them get so heavily parasitized that we cull them before they ever make it into the breeding population. And that just goes to show that we've made a lot of progress with the genetics we have in terms of being naturally resistant to the effects of the parasites. So it's great to not have to do any deworming and have the animals thrive and be reproductively successful and all that sort of thing.
When you first started with your goats and sheep there, Did you target specific breeds, or did you target looking for animals from breeders who had practices like you, or did you go to the sale barn and pick up animals?
So the first ones I got were from Kansas for the goats. The sheep I bought from all over the place. I started with Dorpers from Wisconsin and had some Polypays and other mixes, and then got Belly Corsicans from Kansas, and they're a horned hair sheep, and they were very parasite resistant. But I was dumb, and I retained the best ewe who learned to jump my fences, and
Oh, no.
I didn't get rid of her or put her somewhere else, and so she taught everybody else. So that whole flock had to go to the sale barn because we couldn't contain them anymore. So then I bought a bunch of other breeds of sheep that came from low maintenance places, and the goats also were Kansas sourced goats that came from low maintenance type operations.
Oh, yeah.
And by that point, I had decided I don't care about breed as long as it survives and has good reproductive traits and raises its babies without me needing to do stuff with it. I'm going for that. And it needs to have so we sell at the sale barn. We don't sell to a restaurant or anything else. So we're targeting typically the ethnic market, and a fairly medium to small size carcass is what they're looking for most of the time. So that works great from a landscape supported production system perspective. Those animals grow without grain or any inputs during the summer. No treatments needed. They're all mutts. I mean, we have some purebreds in the flock, in the herd, but the majority of them are just mixed breed, whatever has the traits that's necessary to survive in a low maintenance type system.
Sounds very much like Laster's philosophy on hair coat color.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. My goal is this, and if the animal meets the goal, weaning that offspring, and I have pounds to sell each year, then what's the other matter?
Right.
Now, being a human, I have a little bit of trouble with that. I don't mind the color, but I'm very picky about the breeds because I love breeds and I love not mixing them. And I say that my goats are a mutt mix because I'm doing that on purpose so that I can get some of those animals, work towards that very low maintenance herd that the parasite pressure is not bad on. I mean, let's rephrase that. Parasite pressure will be there, but they can handle it.
Right. Yeah, they can handle whatever parasite level comes to them. And I tried for a while to have tonics. I tried like the Tex Master, which is basically like a myotonic boar mix, and Kiko mixes into that, and Spanish. And so the herd of goats now is like every breed of meat goats with a splash of dairy here and there.
Oh, yeah.
And I was surprised. I mean, for the research project for the doctorate, we were using dairy goats, and I was surprised at the level of parasite resistance that dairy goats actually have. They don't have feed efficiency. They don't maintain body condition well in a browsing type situation, but they tend to have quite surprisingly good parasite resistance.
Oh, yes. Yeah. With your sheep and goats, you mentioned doing set stocking with your goats for a time, and now as you have more grass and forbs in there, you're introducing more sheep. What kind of fencing did you use for your goats? And as you move to that more rotational grazing, what kind of fencing are you using for that?
So when I started out with the small ruminants, I only had electro-net. And I used electro-net for 10 years without any perimeter fences year round. And I tried using like the Gallagher speed fence or smart fence. That's it. And they would just blast right through that. I
told you earlier, Cherrie, that I'm a slow learner. I purchased 2 of those things, and they aren't cheap. And I used one years ago, and it just didn't work for me. Well, it's been a number of years, and I guess I need my memory refreshed, so I bought another one last year just to use a little bit because I'm like, if it'd work, it'd be so great. It doesn't work for me. Maybe I'll remember it and won't buy the third one, but
we have one old one that we keep lending out to people if they're interested in it, because they're like, well, that should be easier than the electro-net. And I said, well, here, take it, use it, see if it
Try it.
works. They come back and they're like, yeah, we're going to go with electro-net instead. So I mean, people don't like electro-net, but it works. It contains them. We only use the 35-inch tall stuff, and they still, we rarely have animals that jump over. And if they do, they get culled, and then that takes care of the problem.
Oh, yeah.
And other people will say, well, you just need to make that smart fence hotter. And we couldn't make it any hotter with the energizers that we had back then. Now we have an 8-joule energizer with a solar panel that we move around, and that could possibly make that fence hot enough, but it sags and there aren't enough posts, and our land is very hilly and rocky, and it's easier with the electro-nets for us to continue using that. And then eventually we made enough money that we could put a perimeter fence around our silvopasture area, and that's woven wire with 2 high tensile top wires.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And are you using like 4x4 woven wire, field wire? Are you using some of the goat wire?
It's not goat wire. I want to say it's maybe 6x4, 4x6.
Oh, okay.
And the holes are actually too big because they're nice because the sheep stick their head through and they keep the fence line clean, but they're bad because the goats stick their heads through, and with their horns, we don't disbud anything. They're too dumb, and some of them just are constantly getting their heads stuck, so they get a stupid
yearlings.
stick. Yeah, well, yearlings, and we occasionally have some adults that have horns that go more back than to the side, and some of those will get their heads stuck through there. So the ones that do that are the ones that typically do it. So we tape a stupid stick on their horns, and then they get their heads through.
I've got one goat right now, J10. If I go out to the pasture, she's got her head through something because we've got some cattle panels and stuff. And it's always her. It's never anyone else. I need to put a stupid stick on her.
Yeah, it makes life easier because you know that there isn't going to be a coyote or something that eats her in the time that you aren't checking.
Oh, yeah. With the electro-netting, when I look at your photos, you all have a lot of electro-net. Is it staying pretty stationary? Would you consider it more of a semi-permanent, or are you all moving it fairly often?
We're moving it constantly. It gets grown in. There's a type of electro-net that supposedly is designed to be left in place for the entire grazing season. But if we leave it in place, the grass around here grows taller than the fence.
Oh, yeah.
It's above 35 inches tall. I mean, it's at shoulder height for me at the peak of growth during this middle of the summer, and there's no way we'd be able to leave that electro-net out and it still be functional. So I'm constantly, at least in the pasture with the horses, I'm constantly driving a line with the ATV and putting the fence in the tire track, in one of the tire tracks.
Oh, yes.
So that it doesn't get shorted out by grass, and pulling that up after we rotate out of there. And every rotation, we have a different size paddock, different locations of paddocks. There's no set layout, I would say, for where we put the paddocks, and it's all based on what's growing where and where the next place is that we should send the herd, and how big an area we need to make based on what's there and how much I want them to eat of it. And our herd, at least with the horses, starts out with 22 to 25 brood mares in May. And then by the end of the season, there's 20 to 22 foals added to that. And then there's a stallion in there too. So it's an increasing number of mouths to feed over the summer, and it's constantly changing where those fences go.
Oh, yes. How do you know when they're ready to move to the next paddock, or when you need to set up?
Yeah, it's based on how far I want them to eat the grass down and what residual is left there. And so I'm watching that as they're eating it. And I try to set up a paddock that will give them enough food for 1 to 3 days. And I'm just constantly adjusting that and move them as needed to the next area. And it may not be the next sequential area. It might be some other area that has better growth and recovery from the prior grazing. So We're always moving them around, and each year my map looks a little different of where we put them and what the shape of the paddocks were and sizes and everything.
And you bring up something very interesting there, your map of what it looks like. What kind of record keeping are you doing as you rotationally graze your animals?
Mainly just writing down where the fence lines were and what days we turned in and turned them out. I haven't been keeping track of forage height or any of that. That's just something I do as I move them in and assess it for when to move them out. We did that when we got an NRCS equip cost share to put in the lane that we have in the center of our grazing system. And it's like a dairy lane, a heavy use area. And then a rotational grazing system, we had to do that for 3 years, even though I already knew how to do that. The program required that you document how tall things were when you turned it in and how short it was when you moved them out and all that sort of thing with a map to go along with that. And so I continued the map, but I haven't been doing the height documentation. And I just, if the forage is producing what it needs to produce to support the herd, then I figure that's good. And I initially didn't think that we'd be able to have as many horses as we do right now, but based on NRCS estimates of forage yield and that sort of thing. But in managing them on the land, we've been able to increase the stocking rate. And so that 22 acres is supporting 25, 26 horses all summer without any supplemental hay or grain or any other feed inputs.
Yeah, and bringing up your horses, let's go ahead and shift to our overgrazing section today, and that's where we take a deeper dive. At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient-dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com. And we're going to talk about your horses and managing grazing for them. But before we get to the grazing, are your horses mutts as well as your goats and sheep?
They're not, because I found a breed that I could get enough good individuals that I didn't feel like I needed to crossbreed. So the Norwegian Fjord breed is a small draft breed from Norway that was developed on the really harsh, poor forage of the west coast of Norway. And they were imported here in the 1930s, and imports have continued over time. But they're a breed that has value as a purebred and registered animal. So with them, I've only done purebred registered fjords and haven't needed, because they're efficient, they're reproductively sound. We have 100%, not calving, but foaling rate, and don't have health problems. They're just easy to handle, manage, great in the grazing system. I don't need to cross anything in, and I don't need to look at any other breeds, and they sell pretty well too. So
what are they used for?
They're used for everything, for riding, driving, draft work, therapy, packing. People use them for hunting and packing.
Yes.
Yeah, so people use them for trail riding, to dressage, jumping, fancy uses, combined driving events, that sort of thing. So they're considered a versatile breed. They're like the Morgan of Norway. The Morgan is the American version of the Norwegian Fjord, basically. Just a medium to small size horse that's versatile and athletic, but good-tempered and easy to manage.
For one, they are just so pretty, and if you in a little bit, we'll talk about how people can find out more about you. They go to your Facebook page for your horses. It is just, it's always so pretty. When you say small to medium size, how many hands are you talking?
So the breed standard is 13 2 hands up to about like 14 2, 14 3 hands.
Oh, okay.
And so you'll have some that are smaller than that. And we have one mare that's almost 15 2 hands, but that's really big for the breed. And
Oh, yes.
they're everywhere from 800 pounds to 1,500 pounds.
Oh, very interesting. I think back to, as a kid, my brother was more into horses. I was not. I had a Cattle of the World book, which listed breeds upon breeds of cattle. My brother had a Horses of the World book that listed horse breeds, which I thought was interesting. I'd look at it once in a while because I'm fascinated by breeds. But that was my brother's deal. We've always had a few horses till the grandkids got old enough. I say grandkids, my kids, my parents' grandkids got old enough that they weren't interested in it. So currently we do not have any horses on the place. And occasionally I think I need a couple. And then I think they won't get used like they need used, and I'll be back to the same point I was before. But I enjoy looking at those photos online, videos online.
Yeah. And the nice thing, another thing that I like about the fjords is that they remember their training, so they can be out to pasture for months to years, and you can just pull them out and hitch them up and drive them, or go ride or whatever, and they remember their training. So it's been very useful for us in that sense to use them as we need them. And I view them also as our backup skid steer. So if we get so much snow that we can't move round bales to feed the goats and the sheep, I have a bale mover that I had welded up to be used with the horse. And so with one horse, I can take round bales out to wherever we need to place them for feeding goats and sheep and the horses themselves over winter.
Using that horse-powered equipment is so appealing to me. I remember reading a book somewhere about a community that just has horses and use horsepower. And I think it's so appealing, but then I remember I'm lazy, and that would be a lot of work.
It is, yeah, and there's not the warmth of the cab of the skid steer.
Right, yes. Yeah. So when we talk about managing grazing for them, you've experienced a lot of managing grazing for sheep and goats. How does grazing horses compare? Is there things you have to do different for them?
Yeah, so I've also managed grass-fed beef and done leader follower systems with the grass-fed beef and done co-grazing with grass-fed beef and goats and sheep. And the breed of horse that I have is more metabolically efficient than grass genetics beef are. So they need a lower quality forage than what the grass genetics beef need in order to not get too fat. So that's the problem with most horses and their management, is that people manage them in a way that they're obese, and then they have health problems that are related to the obesity. And a lot of people feel that they can't graze horses on what, if you look at my pictures, looks like lush grass, is because they're afraid that they'll founder, and which is basically a insulin resistance and response to too much energy into their system from the grazing system. And we avoid that by me basically just applying everything that I had learned in animal science and all of the beef grazing podcasts, that basically treating the horses like dry cows and feeding them in a way that they're not going to get too fat. So if they're too fat, they're not going to breed. Same concept for the horses, for the type we have. Now, I listened to a podcast on a lady that was managing bucking string horses, and her experience was the opposite, where those horses have a higher quality forage need than the grass-fed beef that are in the same system. So based on the breed and the type of horse that you're talking about, you need to modify the forage quality that you give them in the paddock, each new paddock break, to maintain their body condition and not let them get too fat or too thin. So it's just like managing the different classes of beef animals or dairy animals. They all have different nutritional needs, and you manage them and the grass to meet those needs.
So when you talk about managing those horses so they don't get too much of that grass and they're grazing lush grass, you're giving them a smaller area, so they're actually, you could say they're running out of forage almost because they're getting all that they need before you move them.
No,
Am I
not
understanding
really.
that correctly?
So we do, that's a typical approach that I see in horse management. People wanting to restrict or limit the quantity of forage that the horses have. My approach has always been, I don't want to limit quantity. I want them to eat as much as they want, but I'm going to limit the quality. I'm going to reduce the quality by letting those forages get more mature, which reduces digestibility of those forages and increases transit time. The passage rate is slower. And so they can't, because the passage rate is slower, they can't shove any more in. So their total caloric intake for that day is reduced simply because they're consuming more lignous forage than if we put them on a 8-inch tall, very lush pasture, which is what I see a lot of people putting their horses on, or a mowed pasture that has just started regrowing again.
Yes.
And all of that's like candy for a horse versus me feeding broccoli to our horses in terms of the forage quality.
So in early spring, when you have everything's lush growth, what are you doing at that point to keep it from being too high quality for them?
We just turn out later. We don't turn them out in spring at the same time as, like we would turn the sheep and goats out earlier than we would turn the horses out. And we have areas that are primarily where we just graze horses and we use the sheep and goats for weed and brush management. The areas that we primarily use for goat and sheep grazing in the silvopasture mainly. But it's not usually until mid-May that we're getting to 4 to 5 leaf stage in our orchard grass, and the stems are starting to elongate. You have some flowering heads starting to emerge. That's the stage of maturity that we turn the horses in. And then we rotate them through that first rotation pretty quickly, and that kind of sets up a grazing wedge that we can then use through the rest of the summer, rotating around and waiting again for each rotation, the recovery to get quite long. And they aren't sending up flowering stalks. Most of the species of forages aren't sending up flowering stalks later in the season, but they are getting more lignous as they get older.
Yeah.
And that works to maintain good body condition on our horses and not let them get too fat. And then the other important thing is we don't restrict hay over winter either. We make quality of hay that would be dry cow hay, low quality hay that is lignous and is not going to make them too fat. And our goal is if they did gain too much over the summer, especially at the end of the summer, then they go on to free choice, low quality hay all winter. And we just keep food in front of them 24/7 and they eat what they need. And if it's the right quality, they will lose whatever extra fat they got during the summer and be ready to go grazing again in the spring.
Oh, yes. Yeah. As you move your cows. Sorry, I'm used to talking about cows too much. As you move your horses, what kind of temporary fencing are you using, or do you have a lot of permanent fence?
We only have perimeter permanent fence. We use electro-net on the interior for our brake fences, and the reason we use that instead of using pigtail posts and single wire is because we have mares with foals. And unlike cows where the calf will go under the fence and lay on the other side and the cow will just stand there and bawl for a baby, the mares will run through the fence to get to the baby or jump the fence. So we've found that the electro-net keeps the foals in, which keeps the mares in. And so even though it's a little more work for me to set up those electro-net brakes, I'll do that. And they raise their babies, they stay in the fences. I can manage the forage quality, and it's a healthy working system.
Are you using the 35-inch, 36-inch netting with your horses as well?
Yep. We use the exact same net for the goats and the sheep and the horses. And the stallions respect that too. I mean,
Oh, yes.
they really don't like being zapped. So if the electric is strong enough, they respect the fences, they will definitely stay in even just 35-inch tall fences.
Oh, yes. Do you ever graze an area with all your species, or do you manage your horses in one herd and then your sheep and goats in a flock, and they don't ever intermingle, but they may still graze the same area?
So it's a mix.
Okay.
Sometimes we'll have the mares. So we tend to keep the mares together as a herd during the summer, and we switch stallions out for breeding when certain mares are coming into heat. But then based on the paddock that we're turning them into, we may turn sheep or goats or sheep and goats into that paddock to eat more of the burdock and the thistle and the
Oh,
multiflora
okay.
rose. And we have black locust suckers that are coming up all the time from
Hmm.
a clone that we have. And so we use the species that we have based on what's in that paddock and what we want them to eat. Sometimes we'll let the horses go through it first and then turn the small ruminants in afterwards. Sometimes we'll put the small ruminants in first, like in the fall after the burdock has set all of its burrs. We'll send the sheep through to pick up all the burrs, or as many as they can pick up first, and then we send the horses through, which reduces the amount of burrs in the manes and tails of the horse.
So what I'm hearing is adaptive grazing,
Yeah.
because you're adjusting it to what's needed in that particular paddock at that time and what
Yep,
your goals are with it. Yeah.
exactly.
And one thing you brought up just then was about sending the sheep ahead to get that. You have some wool sheep too.
Yes. We have
And
mutt
and
for
I'm
sheep.
sorry I didn't even cover that before, and I knew you had that. So that just triggered it.
We have hair sheep, we have wool sheep, we have hair wool crosses, and I don't know, there's 5 or 6 breeds of sheep in that mix. So just like our goats, they're a mutt mix of anything that has traits that survive, and we have about 60 of them that get shorn each spring, but the rest of the 150 or so are hair sheep. We prefer the hair.
Oh, yes. And we'll get back to the horses, and I'm sorry to go on this tangent, but I was like, I didn't even ask you about the wool sheep because I thought that was interesting. Because
Sure.
most people don't have wool sheep around here unless they're in the club lamb business. Yeah.
I like the wool sheep because the ones that we brought in were Polypay Icelandic and
Yeah.
Baby Doll and Shetland. And the Baby Doll have nice meaty carcasses. I mean, for a pet
Yes.
type breed, they don't have too long the legs, and they're just a little square stool on those little short legs, and they make a nice broad back when crossed with other breeds of sheep. The Polypay and Icelandic are very good maternals. They typically produce twins and triplets and raise them. And so we bred that into hair sheep and tried to avoid hoof rot issues by having minimal Dorper in the mix, mostly Katahdin, a little St. Croix for parasite resistance. The Shetlands we probably are going to get rid of most of the Shetlands, and they have really fine bone and they milk down hard. They
Oh,
don't
yes.
maintain as good a body condition, but they're very good mothers, and they usually produce twins. So in the mix, they're good, but the ones that are pure are just very, very thin. And at the end of the grazing season, after they've weaned their lambs, and there's just we have a mutt mix, and some of them need shorn every year, and they're too good and they contribute too many lambs to us every year to cull them. So
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
one day we'll get to the point where we get rid of most of the wool sheep, but even the hair sheep will pick up burrs. They just won't hold on to them as long as the wool
Right.
sheep will.
Yeah. Now, yeah, I don't know why I stuttered there. One thing with the breeds, so you mentioned baby dolls, and I see their pictures and they look like really nice carcasses, but I can't tell their size.
They're small.
How are they compared to your hair sheep? Are they smaller than your hair sheep?
Yeah, so the baby dolls at maturity are like 120 pounds. The ewes are,
Oh, okay.
and then the hens and others are more in the 150 to 180 pounds.
Oh, yes. So your Katahdins, compared to mine, are pretty good size because mine aren't quite that big.
Yeah, and the St. Croix bring the size down too. We bred a
Yeah.
bunch of St. Croix, and when you breed a St. Croix to a Shetland, you get a really tiny little thing. But when you when you breed them to the Katahdins and Dorper crosses and things like that, then you end up with something that's more in the like 130-pound size range.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, Cherrie, thank you for going back on that tangent on the sheep
Yep.
when we then moved to horses. And listeners, thank you for following my thought pattern. Back to your horses, are there anything that took you a little bit to understand with your horses on grazing versus the other species? Any gotchas or anything you would suggest to someone else?
I think the thing that I had to learn was the perspectives of other people and how to navigate the things that were being told to other people about how horses graze or shouldn't be grazed, and me trying to figure out where the disconnect was, because I had been doing the grazing and hadn't run into these problems that these people are talking about.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
I've had to back my way through it to figure out why are mine not having health problems? Why am I not having founder colic? All of the issues that people claim that horses will have when you manage them out on the landscape, to try and communicate to people what it is I'm doing and give them the information that's actually useful, rather than me being like, well, I just graze them. I mean, why
Oh,
can't you just graze yours?
yeah.
So I didn't feel like I ran into any problems myself, other than wading through the rhetoric that's out there and
Oh, yeah.
trying to understand other people's perspectives. Like, I frequently hear people say, well, horses have two sets of teeth, and therefore they're automatically harder on the vegetation than cows or sheep or goats are. And I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me, because it's all about how you manage them. If you leave them in a spot if you leave any animal in a spot for a long time, it's going to be a golf course that is going to be
Yes.
left behind. Our neighbors have dairy cows, and their farm is in some of those pastures where they continuously graze is a golf course. It's way shorter, and the forage productivity would take 3 years before it would get to the level of our farm, and it's basically
Oh,
the same
yeah.
soils, simply because they overgraze it so much. And it's not about the number of teeth that the animal has, it's about how you manage the animal. So
Yeah.
horses can be managed to not overgraze pastures very easily. You just move them more frequently and watch what they're consuming and move them. If that species that they're consuming that gets down short, move them before they make it too short.
So I see these lots or these small pastures with horses in them close to a house. How would you suggest they get started on managing their grazing a little bit better?
Typically, yeah. So typically, the most horse properties are overstocked to begin with. They often have a small acreage and too many animals to be great to graze them all year round on growing forages. They just don't have the land base. Or there's the opposite, where people have a big, large pasture and they have 5 horses out in 40 acres, and they don't like that because they can't easily go out and get their horse. It's lost in the weeds out back, and so they want to keep them in a dry lot up near the house or near a barn, so it's easy to go get them. And our system is different than that, because we installed a central graveled lane in the middle of our pasture, and all of our rotational grazing paddocks, or adaptive grazing, or whatever you want to call the term for what we're doing, they all connect to that lane. And so we put something that's different than what you would typically want to do as a cow, sheep, or goat operation. We have the water tank up in the lane, and we have the mineral and salt at the other end of the lane. So it induces the horses to move. And each
Oh, yes.
paddock is attached to that lane, so they can come up, drink, go get mineral and salt, and go back out to graze. And we want them to move, because that helps with just physical health, and I don't have to go out and exercise all of our horses all the time. But the other aspect of that is a human can just walk down that lane and into this small 0.6 acre paddock that we have almost 40 horses in, and go grab whichever horse you want and take it out and use it and put it right back in. So it's not really difficult to go get your horse out of that system. And what I would say for people that are considering shifting from a dry lot type system to a rotational grazing system, it's easy enough to break up paddocks, and there's lots of guidance and stuff about that out there. But I feel like the thing that is the catch point for a lot of people is they don't free feed their horses. They feed them grain, meals once or twice a day, and they limit the amount of forage that they have. And so they're standing around with nothing to eat for a large portion of the day. And the horses gorge then when they do get access to a pasture. Ours don't gorge because they know that they're never going to run out of pasture. They don't gorge on hay because they never run out of hay during the winter. So shifting and transitioning the herd to be able to consume as much forage as they want changes their metabolism from a starvation mode to a maintenance mode, and then they behave differently. So making that change first, getting them onto free choice forage that is of the quality that's necessary to maintain the body condition for that particular horse or horses. Once they're doing that and they're in a good, healthy body condition, then you can split up pastures and start giving them 1 day's worth of forage in a small area at a time, and then move them to a next 1 day's worth of forage and leave that original paddock that you put them in with enough residual that those plants can grow back again within the grazing season to graze again, but don't return until they've fully recovered. And that's the main thing that I think horse folks tend to not do. They tend to leave them, if they do have paddocks, they maybe only have 4 instead of 20.
Right. Yeah.
And they will leave them in there for 2 weeks and then move them to the next paddock and return in like 10 days, and the pasture hasn't recovered, and then the horses are overgrazing the particular plants that they like, totally leaving the fescue and everything else that they don't like alone. And so you get uneven use of the stand, and you get those undesirable, unpalatable plants taking over, weeds, compaction, all of the typical things that you see in horse pastures that aren't managed very well.
Excellent advice there. One thing I want to jump back to is your lane. And I just want to talk a few particulars about your lane. What size gravel did you put on it? Did you put geotextile fabric underneath it? Just how did y'all build the lane? Because I know that's a really simple question, but I also know some people get hung up on like, well, how do I do it?
Right. So we were installed that per NRCS standards and specs because it was part of an equip contract.
Yes.
So we followed the standard that they require, which is basically taking the sod layer out. I don't remember whether a geotextile was put down. We don't have enough clay up here, and it's on the very top of the hill so we don't have quite as big of an issue as a low clay farm for gravel sinking into the clay, where geotextile would definitely be needed. But whether that's there or not, I don't even remember. But it's large gravel breaker rock, and then I think 2 other smaller grades of gravel in layers above that, all compacted, and then capped with fines. And the gravel that was used is dolomitic limestone because that's the gravel, the bedrock that's around here. And so our horses and other animals have access to a source of calcium and magnesium just in the fines that are on top of this lane. And then when we scrape manure that would accumulate there. So sometimes in the spring, the fall, and really muddy times during the winter, we will put their bales on that lane and basically use it as a long, skinny dry lot to feed them over winter when the conditions are so bad that we can't be out bale grazing, really tearing up that bale grazing area. And so we'll scrape that wasted hay and manure that accumulates there and spread that on our hay fields. And it's picking up, when we're scraping, it's picking up those fines. And so we're putting calcium and magnesium back out into the hay field, plus all the nutrients that were in that hay and the manure and everything being recycled back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Very good. How wide is your lane?
It's 20 feet.
20 feet?
Yep, 20 feet wide and 1,056 feet long. And then we on the end of it, so it ends where kind of in the center of the pasture, and that is a high point, and we didn't put an end on the lane, it was just open. And we started managing the horses out there, and the horses used an area at the end of the lane whenever they were done grazing. So in the morning they'll have a grazing bout, and then they'll go stand together and digest, and then they'll go back out and graze some more, and then come back and stand and digest. They like it on the top of the hill in the breeze, and they would cluster together there, swishing flies, and we used the footprint of the space that they chose to stand in as their resting period to be the size and shape of the pad that we put there. And then we put gates and posts around that, and that is kind of the center spoke for a lot of the grazing paddocks that go out to the rest of the pasture. And it's just the right size because they showed us through their behavior what they needed, and we just made the fencing and system set up to what they needed. And by that point we had about the number of head that we figured that the land could support. So we didn't expect that it would be changing much in the future. And then we felt confident in installing some permanent infrastructure. And the lane has a few gates in it, and it's woven wire sides with high tensile top wire. And that high tensile brings the electric out to the center of the pasture, so we can tie into that for setting up the brake fences.
First off, I think that was wonderful. You used the behavior of the animals to figure out what you needed to do there, as opposed to so often we decide what we think they should do and say, here, now use what I built for you.
Right.
Rather than listening to the animals. On your lanes, you mentioned a few gates. How close are your gates together, and what's your gate material?
Well, they're not frequent enough. We designed that before we really were using it at the level that we should have. And that's something I always recommend to people is don't install something permanent until you've used it for a while and figure out what actually works and where you do want permanent infrastructure. But they're just pipe gates that we close, and we run an electric in front of them so that otherwise the horses rub on them and they pick them up off the hinges. And but if something's electrified, they leave it alone. So that works really well.
Very good, Cherrie. I've really enjoyed this conversation on horses. Like I mentioned to you at the beginning, it's not something we talk a lot about, but I really think we need to get the conversation going further, and it's going now. Thank you for that. Before we shift to the famous 4 questions, is there anything else you would like to add on grazing management for horses or anything else?
I think just having an open mind and letting the animals help you decide how to use that land is important, because the horses like to be high in the landscape like goats and sheep do, whereas the cattle like to be low in the landscape. When they're resting, they go down into the ravines, into the trees. The horses have access to the ravines and the trees, but they choose to go to the upper high parts in the landscape and stand there in the sun in the middle of summer and in the wind in the middle of winter. So it's by having the animals that you want to have in the system and watching their behavior, that can help you a lot in designing things that work for those animals in that system.
Oh, very good. Very good. Cherrie, it is time for our famous 4 questions. Same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. Our first question, what's your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
I think there's forages books that I actually have on the shelf behind me. I have a lot of the grazing, like generalized type books that are recommended, and a lot of the ones that you've had on the podcast are ones that I've ordered because I've not read them before. But like these forages and Introduction to Grassland Agriculture, Volume 1 and Volume 2, I like data. I like understanding the study design behind what data is available. And I like these books because they give me data. And it's not just anecdote or a random chart, I can go look up the publication and see how the study was designed and whether the conclusions were reflective of what was actually designed. And I found that having that kind of information is useful for applying what is typically designed for cattle in terms of adaptive grazing guidance and applying that to horses and just understanding the differences between the species and a highly metabolically efficient horse versus a dairy cow that needs much higher quality forages. And books like those really help me figure out, they help me figure out why what I was doing works for the horses that I have. And so then able to explain it to people so that they can do the same thing with their animals.
Oh, very good. And what I took from that was you are a person that loves footnotes and endnotes.
Because I like detail.
I love picking up a book that has those available. Now, I probably don't do a good enough job following those to really look it up, but I love it when I see a book that has their sources listed.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you saying this? Our second question, what's your favorite tool for the farm?
I've thought about that, and the thing that we use just about every day during the summer is the skids or the ATVs, and hauling those nets everywhere and checking on animals in the silo pasture. We could ride the horses out there. I could rig up some pack saddles and move everything around with them, but the ATV really makes it a lot easier. But then really the reason that I've been successful with the horses and rotational grazing or adaptive grazing, managed grazing, is having a thinking mind, tinkering with concepts and ideas and figuring out how to make it all work with the interconnectedness of the system and the animals and us and all of that. So a mind that can filter the information that's out there and apply it in a functional manner to goals and objectives of the system.
Oh, that is so important, being observant and reflecting and thinking about it. Excellent there. For a third question, what would you tell someone just getting started?
I would say, especially related to the horses, don't listen to all of the stuff out there of people that say that you can't graze horses. You can, and you just have to integrate the behavior and function and metabolic needs of the horses that you have, integrate that into the information that's available for cattle and goats and sheep and other species out there. So use your head and don't just rely on information from people who say it can't be done because they haven't figured out how to do it.
Excellent advice. And lastly, where can others find out more about you?
Sure. We have a website that I've put together, wonderacresfarm.com. And I'm on Facebook under my name, Cherrie Nolden, for the goat and sheep and livestock guard dog information, silo pasture details. And then I have a Wonder Fjords, WON space DER space FJORDS Facebook profile for the horse related postings, because there's the horse people get tired of seeing so much sheep and goat and LGD stuff, and the small ruminant folks are like, why are you posting so many pictures of horses? So I made a separate site for them, or separate Facebook profile for the horses.
And here I am. I'm following both of them, and I encourage the listeners to do the same.
Okay.
It'll be well worth their time.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I said lastly, but actually we have one more question. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, I mean, you interview so many really amazing people, and they have so much breadth and depth of knowledge in so many areas, and they're contributing all this in your recordings. Are there some of those things that you feel like you got the first row seat on, and now you're using that on your own farm and making your operation even better?
and to be honest, that's the whole basis for the podcast. I thought this gives me an opportunity to talk to these people that if I just called them up, they'd be like, "Who are you? Why do you want to talk?" Now I have a podcast. I'm be like, "Well, I have a podcast and we want to make an episode." They're like, "Oh, okay, we'll talk."
Yeah, there you
It
go.
has helped. I can't even put into words how much it's helped my operation. And there's a few reasons for it. One, I hear about these practices that people are doing that I'm like, "Oh, wait, I need to try that." Or, yeah, that makes sense that your horses were getting overconditioned or had the potential, so you had to graze them on some lower quality forages. When I think back to our horses, we did a very poor job of managing them, but they would get fat. And that was always an issue. So bringing out things like that, because sometimes, even though I like to think I'm observant, I like to think I reflect upon things, there's times that people point out obvious things to me, and I'm like, wow, why didn't I think of that? So I love those moments. But then, so I get those practices and I get to see how they work on my operation. And sometimes it's practices, sometimes it's mindset.
Sure.
And then the other thing that's really important, when you go to a conference or some kind of gathering and you talk to people, even if you're an introvert, you leave there energized, ready to go.
Yeah.
It's just you're getting information and they're validating some things you have thought or you're doing. They're causing you to think about some of your practices, and some of them may be new, but you leave there energized. And what that does, that motivation when you get home to do what you're doing or to try something new is really high.
Yes.
But motivation only lasts so long. And sometimes we need little shots of that motivation. And I feel like this podcast is little shots of motivation for me for when I have something. I have an issue right now with a livestock guardian dog that I'll probably put at the first of this episode. I just got some pigs because I was going to do pastured pigs.
Yep.
And my livestock guardian dogs have killed 3 of the 4.
Really? Wow.
Yes. And I introduced them. I even let them in the pen with me so they knew. I thought this would be introduction. And I know one dog wanted to play a little bit more, and I got onto him. I got him out, and I had a pig get out, and they attacked the pig. And then I got that pig back in. I got onto my dogs. I thought we're good. And it's one dog in particular. I don't notice my other dogs doing it. Then the next morning, I'm missing a hog or a pig. I find it. It's been killed. We went through that. I thought we were in a good spot, and I go out to my hog pen yesterday, and my dog is laying there with a dead pig. So I'm not. So I've got to figure out an answer for that. But the reason I bring it up, those things happen on a farm.
They do.
It's not always roses and everything nice. And getting some motivation or extra energy during those times is really good. And I think listening to podcasts provide that as well. But I just happen to be the person that gets to talk to the guest.
Yeah. Well, with that one LGD, you can put a muzzle on him. And
okay.
There are muzzles that are designed they're tall enough that the dog can open its mouth and the holes are big enough that they can get kibble through the holes.
Yes.
So they can drink and eat with the muzzle on. And for our livestock guard dog adults, we need the size 6 muzzles.
Okay.
And so when we have individuals that we're changing things around, we have introduced pigs and the dogs that we had at the time with that attention from us and us telling the dogs, no, these belong here. You need to leave them alone. That went just fine. We didn't run into the issues that you have.
Oh, good.
And we bought weanling piglets and raised them up with the goats and the sheep and the dogs in there with them. The pigs did eat the chickens that were wandering around in there. They would catch and eat the chickens, and the dogs got mad when the pigs did that. But by then, the pigs were big enough that the dogs really couldn't do anything to the pigs. But for that one dog, if you put a muzzle on him, maybe he will get to the point where he accepts that they're part of his guarding group and the other dogs don't need the muzzles, and that way they can all stay together and you won't have that one injuring or killing piglets.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about a muzzle because I'm like, what am I going to have to do? I tried to actually have him up here. I have the sheep and goats not too far from him right now, from the pigs right now, and I try and have him up there when I'm out there taking care of them, so he sees
Right.
I'm caring for these animals. That's your job too, but
Yep.
thus far it hasn't worked. But
Yeah. The other thing that you might run into is we've had where we put a muzzle on one dog and the other dogs sense that dog is frustrated with the muzzle and they help the dog by chewing it off. So you might need to put muzzles on the other ones to
Oh,
prevent them
okay.
from chewing the muzzle off of the one that actually needs the muzzle.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Good advice. See, another benefit of the podcast, just these moments to have these conversations. And I think to go back to your question just a little bit, I think beekeeping organizations do a great job of having local group meetings.
Sure.
And I don't think as grazers, there's pasture walks and different things out there, but we aren't as good, or maybe good's the wrong word, as diligent as the beekeeping organizations. And I've even talked to local grazers here about us having a local grazing group that meets once a month. Just go out for supper so we can talk grazing. But I haven't took the step to really get it started. We've talked about it and we all think it's a great idea, but we've yet to do it. But just having those opportunities to talk with others is so important.
Yeah. And like you said, these recordings and being able to access them when you're out driving or
Oh, yeah.
doing something that you don't have to be real focused on what you're doing so you can listen gives you that kind of community. And even though you're not meeting one-on-one and discussing things, you're hearing new ideas that would be similar to what you would talking with your neighbors about what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing.
Right, I agree. Well, Cherrie, really enjoyed having you come on the podcast and share today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk with you and hope that some of this info is useful to your listeners.
Oh, I am confident it will be.
Thanks.
On Jen Kobe's podcast, Choosing to Farm, at the end of each episode or interview, she kind of provides a summary or what caught her attention. I've thought for a long time we needed that for the grazing grass. The issue was just doing it. So we're going to try it today, see how it lands. I really was excited to get Cherrie on the podcast. I'd reached out to her a year or two ago. One of the listeners had suggested her because I'd mentioned about finding someone using horses in a regenerative fashion. A couple things I really like about what she's doing. One, she's taken a very deliberate approach to how she's managing her grazing. She's being observant. She's reflecting upon it and choosing the right grazing management for what she's doing. She's holding her horses in longer so that the grass gets more mature, which, I know in the springtime of year, I just want to get animals out on grass or moving. So that's a great way to not always just do what everyone's doing. Hey, those horses needed more mature forage, so I'll just hold them up a little bit longer. And I can manage that. The other thing, creating a lane. I know in dairies, when you look at New Zealand dairies, a lot of times they have lanes that the cows go in and out on. Using that concept for horses is great, I think. For one, it gives you nice access to your facilities. And the other thing is she has water at one end of the lane and mineral salt at the other end, so the horses are getting more exercise. Plus, she observed horses' behavior and actually made an area at the end of the lane that's where the horses kind of go and stand. It's in a high spot. She gave them plenty of room for the number she has now. Those are a couple of things that really stood out to me. I hope you enjoyed it. In fact, go over Grazing Grass Community, post what stood out to you or what you got from this episode. Look forward to seeing it. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Grazing Grass Podcast, where we bring you stories and insights into grass-based livestock production. If you're new here, we've got something just for you. Our new listener resource guide is packed with everything you need to get started on your listening journey with the Grazing Grass Podcast. It gives you more information about the podcast, about myself, and next steps. You can grab your free copy at grazinggrass.com/guide. Don't miss out. And hey, do you have a grazing story to share? We're always looking for passionate producers to feature on the show. Whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, your story matters. Head over to grazinggrass.com/guest to learn more and apply to be a guest. We'd love to share your journey with our growing community of grazers. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.